Some folks hit rock bottom, pour themselves a glass of whiskey, and try to sleep the pain away. That has never been my style. When my life turned upside down, I found myself sitting alone in an airport terminal just before midnight, making a phone call that would change my family forever. But that part comes later. It all started on a rainy Monday evening in early April. I live in Cedar Grove, Ohio, a quiet town where everybody knows everybody else. At 73 years old, I'd settled into a routine that didn't change much. Dinner at 6. The evening news. A little television in my favorite recliner. Then, without meaning to, I'd usually wake up around midnight with the remote balanced on my chest. That night was no different. The television was playing some competition where couples argued over kitchen remodels like their lives depended on cabinet colors. I wasn't really watching anymore. My eyes had closed somewhere between the commercials. Then my phone vibrated across the side table. I frowned and reached for it. The screen showed a name I never expected to see that late. Margaret Ellis. Now, Margaret wasn't the kind of woman who stayed awake after dark. She was 80 years old, lived 3 houses down from my son, and believed decent people should already be in bed before the 10 o'clock news ended. The last time she'd called me after sunset was because she'd convinced herself someone was trying to steal tomatoes from her garden. So when her name flashed on my screen at 11:42 p.m., I knew something had gone terribly wrong. I answered before the second ring finished. Margaret. Her voice came through barely above a whisper. Frank. I'm sorry to bother you this late. Every trace of sleep disappeared. What's happened? She hesitated for a few seconds, and I could hear her trying to steady her breathing. I've been hearing little Sophie crying through the wall for almost 2 days. My heart stopped. What do you mean? I knocked on the door this afternoon. She answered it herself. The room suddenly felt colder. She was still wearing pajamas, Frank. It was nearly 5 o'clock. The television was on, there was a bowl with dry cereal sitting on the coffee table, and there wasn't another soul in that house. I slowly stood up without even realizing I was moving. Where are Daniel and Claire? I asked Sophie the same thing. Margaret's voice cracked. She told me they left Saturday morning for a vacation. I gripped the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. Did anyone stay with her? She let out a tired sigh. She said a neighbor she didn't know brought over a sandwich yesterday afternoon. Other than that, nobody. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Then Margaret said something I'll never forget for as long as I live. The first thing she asked me was whether her grandpa knew she was alone. That sentence hit me harder than anything else. Not, when are my parents coming home? Not, can you help me? She wanted to know if I knew. I'm leaving right now, I said. Before I even found my shoes, I called Sophie. The phone rang once. Then I heard the smallest voice. Grandpa. She sounded exhausted. Not sleepy. Not sick. Just tired in a way no 9-year-old ever should. Hey, sweetheart, I said as calmly as I could. Tell me you're okay. I think I am. Those 4 words broke something inside me. Children are supposed to answer with confidence. Instead, she sounded like she was worried about giving the wrong answer. Listen carefully, I said. Is every door locked? Yes, sir. Good girl. Have you eaten today? I had cereal this morning. She paused. And I still have half my sandwich from yesterday. I closed my eyes. You saved it. I didn't know when somebody would come back. For a second, I couldn't breathe. No child should ever have to ration food because they don't know when an adult is coming home. I grabbed my truck keys off the counter. Pack a small bag. Bring your stuffed bear and your favorite pajamas. She was quiet. Then she asked the question that haunted me for months afterward. Grandpa. Yeah, sweetheart. Are Mommy and Daddy mad at me? I froze in the middle of my hallway. My little brother got to go with them. I asked if I could come too, but Mommy said there wasn't enough room. Her voice became softer. I thought maybe I did something bad. Every ounce of anger I felt disappeared. All that remained was heartbreak. No, honey. I spoke slowly so she'd hear every single word. You didn't do one thing wrong. Not one. Another long silence. I'm coming to get you, I continued. You'll never spend another night alone in that house. I promise. This time, she didn't answer. I heard something even better. A tiny sigh of relief. The kind a scared child lets out when she finally believes someone is coming. I pulled into Oakwood Drive a little after midnight. The whole neighborhood was dark except for one porch light glowing near the end of the street. Margaret was sitting on the front steps with Sophie wrapped in a thick blue blanket. Her little backpack rested beside her, and her worn stuffed bear was tucked tightly under one arm. The moment my headlights swept across the yard, she looked up. For 1 second she just stood there. Then she ran. She threw both arms around my waist before I could even shut the truck door. I hugged her as tightly as I dared, feeling how small she really was. Kids always seem bigger in your memories than they are in your arms. It's okay, I whispered. I've got you. She nodded against my jacket but didn't say a word. Margaret walked over slowly, her eyes red from crying. I tried calling Daniel yesterday morning, she said quietly. Then again this afternoon. Straight to voicemail every time. I wasn't surprised. My son had always been good at avoiding difficult conversations. What shocked me was how far he'd gone this time. Thank you, I told her. She squeezed my shoulder. I couldn't leave that little girl by herself another night. I know. Before I helped Sophie into my truck, Margaret reached into her purse and handed me a folded piece of paper. My niece works for a law office in Columbus, she said. The attorney's name is Melissa Grant. She specializes in family cases. I glanced at the paper. If this turns ugly, Margaret continued, you're going to need someone who knows exactly what they're doing. I slipped the note into my pocket. I hope it doesn't come to that. She looked me straight in the eye. I think it already has. Neither of us said another word. I buckled Sophie into the passenger seat because she refused to let go of my hand. Within 10 minutes, she had fallen asleep with her head leaning against the window and her stuffed bear pressed against her chest. The drive back to my farmhouse felt longer than it ever had. No radio. No music. Just the sound of tires rolling over wet pavement and the occasional sniffle from the little girl sleeping beside me. At a stoplight, my phone buzzed with a notification. Against my better judgment, I picked it up. It was a social media post. Daniel had uploaded a family photo less than 3 hours earlier. There they were. Daniel, his wife, Claire, and their 7-year-old son, Ethan. The three of them stood on the deck of a luxury resort overlooking bright blue water, all smiling like they didn't have a care in the world. The caption read, "Making unforgettable family memories." Family. I stared at that word. 3 smiling faces. 1 missing child. The light turned green. The driver behind me honked, but I barely noticed. I finally put the truck in gear and kept driving. By the time we reached my place, it was nearly 1 in the morning. I carried Sophie inside without waking her. The guest room hadn't been used in months, but I made the bed while she slept on the couch for a few minutes. Then I tucked her beneath a warm quilt that my late wife had sewn years ago. Before leaving the room, I plugged in a small night light. Something told me she hadn't slept peacefully in a long time. When I reached the kitchen, I poured myself a cup of coffee I didn't actually want. Then I grabbed a legal pad. Instead of sitting there feeling angry, I started writing. Every phone call. Every time. Everything Margaret had told me. Every sentence Sophie had spoken. The half-eaten sandwich. The cereal. The unanswered calls. The social media post. If anyone ever questioned what had happened, I wanted facts, not memories. Around 2 o'clock in the morning, Margaret texted me Melissa Grant's full contact information. I saved it immediately. Then I opened my laptop. Not to read the news. Not to distract myself. I searched for the first available appointment with a family attorney. As the confirmation email appeared on my screen, I realized something. This wasn't just about rescuing my granddaughter from one terrible weekend. This was about making sure she never had to wonder again whether someone would come back for her. And sitting alone in that quiet kitchen, I made myself a promise. Whatever it cost, however long it took, she would never feel forgotten again. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured Sophie sitting alone in that silent house, eating dry cereal because she didn't know when her parents would come home. By the time the sun started creeping through the kitchen window, I had already finished 2 cups of coffee and made up my mind about what came next. A little after 7, I heard soft footsteps in the hallway. Sophie appeared wearing an oversized t-shirt I'd found in the guest room dresser. Her hair stuck out in every direction, and she hugged that old stuffed bear so tightly I wondered if she'd slept without letting go of it once. She stopped when she saw breakfast already waiting on the table. Pancakes, bacon, fresh strawberries. The kind of breakfast my late wife used to make every Saturday. Her eyes grew wide. Is all that for me? I smiled. For us. She slid into the chair carefully, almost like she wasn't sure she was allowed to. Before taking a bite, she looked at me. Grandpa. Yeah. You don't have to spend so much money on me. That sentence hit me harder than anything I'd heard the night before. A 9-year-old shouldn't worry about costing someone too much. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. Sweetheart, feeding my granddaughter isn't expensive. She gave me a tiny smile. It's my favorite thing to do. For the first time since I'd picked her up, she actually laughed. It wasn't loud. It wasn't carefree. But it was real. After breakfast, I told her to pack a few more clothes. We're going somewhere? We sure are. Where? A place with sunshine, a beach, and absolutely no chores. She blinked twice. You're kidding. I raised an eyebrow. Do I look like a man who jokes about beaches? She studied my face for a second before letting out the biggest grin I'd seen from her in years. Then she took off running toward the bedroom, yelling that she needed to pack immediately. I couldn't help smiling. That laugh. That excitement. It reminded me of the little girl she'd been before life started teaching her lessons no child should ever learn. By 10 that morning, we were on our way to the airport. During the drive, Sophie asked more questions than I'd heard from her in months. Have you ever been on a plane? Lots of times. Are the clouds really close? Closer than you'd think. Do they give you snacks? If we're lucky. She giggled. I hope they have cookies. So do I. For the first time in a long while, our conversation sounded normal. Not forced. Not careful. Just a grandfather and his granddaughter talking about airplanes. While Sophie looked out the passenger window counting red cars, my phone buzzed. Daniel. Calling. I stared at the screen until it stopped ringing. A few seconds later, another call came. Then, another. Finally, a text message appeared. Dad, where's Sophie? I locked my phone without answering. If he'd been worried enough to ask that question, he should have asked it 3 days earlier. We reached the airport just before noon. Everything fascinated Sophie. The huge windows. The rolling suitcases. The announcements over the speakers. Even the moving walkways. Can we ride it twice? We're absolutely riding it twice. So we did. 3 times, actually. She laughed the entire way. Watching her smile made me realize how little it had taken. She didn't need expensive toys. She didn't need designer clothes. She just needed someone who made her feel like she mattered. While she picked out a bag of gummy bears from a gift shop, I stepped a few feet away and dialed the number Margaret had given me. Melissa Grant speaking. My name is Frank Harper. Mr. Harper. She sounded like she'd already been expecting my call. My Aunt Margaret told me what happened. I need help. There was no hesitation in her voice. Start from the beginning. For nearly 30 minutes, I told her everything. She interrupted only to ask about dates, times, and names. When I finished, the line stayed quiet for several seconds. Finally, she spoke. You did the right thing. I hope so. No, she said firmly. I know so. She explained that leaving a young child alone for that length of time could have serious legal consequences. She also told me not to confront Daniel or Claire until we had every piece of documentation organized. Emotion doesn't win cases, she said. Evidence does. I wrote those 3 words on the back of my boarding pass. Evidence wins. Before hanging up, she gave me one final instruction. Take care of Sophie first. What about everything else? It can wait a few days. I looked across the terminal. Sophie was waving a bag of gummy bears over her head like she'd just won the lottery. For the first time in nearly 48 hours, I felt something besides anger. Hope. Small. Fragile. But real. Maybe this trip wasn't about running away from what had happened. Maybe it was about reminding one little girl that the world could still be a safe place. And I intended to spend every minute proving it. By early afternoon, our plane was climbing through a blanket of white clouds. Sophie had claimed the window seat before I even finished fastening my seat belt, and she spent the first 20 minutes with her forehead pressed against the glass. Grandpa, she whispered, the cars look like little toys. They sure do. And the houses are tiny. Everything looks smaller from up here. She nodded thoughtfully. I wish problems worked like that. I turned to look at her. What do you mean? If you got high enough, maybe the sad stuff would look smaller too. For a 9-year-old, she had a way of saying things that could stop a grown man in his tracks. I rested my hand over hers. I hope one day it will. A flight attendant came by with snacks, and Sophie accepted a bag of pretzels like it was the greatest gift anyone had ever offered her. Do they really let you have 2? If you ask nicely. She smiled at the attendant. May I please have another one? The woman laughed and handed her 2 extra bags. There you go, sweetheart. Sophie looked at me with wide eyes. She gave me 3. Looks like she knew a good customer when she saw one. For the rest of the flight, she carefully tucked the unopened bags into her backpack. Saving those? I asked. She nodded automatically. My heart sank. She wasn't saving them because she wanted them later. She was saving them because she'd gotten used to not knowing when food would come again. That single habit told me more than any conversation ever could. When we landed in Charleston, South Carolina, the warm ocean breeze greeted us the second we stepped outside the airport. I'd rented a small cottage overlooking the beach instead of one of those fancy luxury resorts. It wasn't extravagant, but it had a wide porch, 2 rocking chairs, and a view of the Atlantic that made the whole world feel peaceful. Sophie walked through the front door carrying her backpack. She stopped. Grandpa. Yeah. We're staying here? We are. For real. I nodded. For a whole week. She slowly walked over to the sliding glass doors and stared out at the waves. I've never seen the ocean before. Neither of us spoke for nearly a minute. Sometimes silence says more than words ever could. Finally, she turned around with the biggest smile I'd seen on her face. It looks like it goes on forever. In some ways, I said, it kind of does. The next morning we woke before sunrise. Neither of us needed an alarm. The beach was almost empty except for a few people jogging and an older couple walking hand in hand. Sophie kicked off her shoes before I even reached the sand. The cold water rushed over her feet. She squealed. It's freezing. Give it another minute. She stepped back in. Then again. Within 5 minutes she was chasing tiny waves, laughing every time one splashed her legs. I stood there watching. The little girl who had whispered every sentence just 2 days earlier was now laughing loudly enough for strangers to smile as they walked past. I wished I could freeze that moment forever. Later that afternoon, we found a small family-owned seafood restaurant near the marina. The owner greeted everyone like they'd been friends for years. Sophie studied the menu. "I've never had shrimp. Today's a good day to change that." When her plate arrived, she looked at the shrimp suspiciously. "They look funny. They taste better than they look." She took one careful bite. Then, another. After the third one, she pointed at the basket of rolls. "Can I have another roll too?" "You can have as many as you want." She smiled. "You keep saying that." "Because I mean it." Halfway through dinner, she became unusually quiet. She stared down at her plate for several seconds. Then she looked at me. "Grandpa." I knew that tone. "What is it?" "If Mom and Dad come back." "They will. Will they still want me?" The restaurant disappeared around me. I didn't hear the conversations. I didn't notice the music. I saw only my granddaughter waiting for an answer no child should ever have to ask. I reached across the table and took both of her hands. "Listen to me very carefully." She nodded. "There is nothing wrong with you." A tear rolled down her cheek. "You hear me?" "Yes." "You didn't make anyone leave." Another tear. "And you never have to earn someone's love by being perfect." She squeezed my hands. "I just wanted them to pick me." "I know." I swallowed hard before continuing. "But whether someone makes the right choice says everything about them." I paused. "And absolutely nothing about you." She looked down for a moment before whispering. "I've never thought about it like that. I hope one day that's the only way you think about it." She smiled through watery eyes. Then, in the most 9-year-old way imaginable, she pointed at the dessert menu. "Can I still get chocolate cake?" I laughed. "I was wondering how long it would take you to ask." "Is that a yes?" "It means we're ordering 2 slices." Her grin returned instantly. Watching that smile come back after everything she'd been carrying felt like watching the sun break through storm clouds. That night, after Sophie fell asleep with the sound of the waves outside her window, I stepped onto the porch with my phone. There was one call I still had to make. Not to my son. Not yet. First, I needed to hear what attorney Melissa Grant had to say after reviewing everything I'd sent her. Because our vacation wasn't just about healing. It was also the beginning of a fight I had no intention of losing. That evening, after Sophie drifted off to sleep, I quietly stepped onto the porch with a mug of coffee. The waves rolled onto the shore in a steady rhythm, and the salty breeze carried just enough cool air to clear my head. I looked back through the sliding glass door before dialing Melissa's number. Sophie was curled up under the blanket with her stuffed bear tucked beneath her chin. For the first time since I'd brought her home, she looked completely at peace. Melissa answered on the second ring. "I've been reviewing everything you emailed," she said without wasting time. "Your notes, Margaret's statement, the photos, the call logs, and the messages. You've done a thorough job." "I figured memories fade," I replied. "Paper doesn't." "Exactly." She paused for a moment. "Frank, this isn't just about one bad decision. It's about a pattern." My grip tightened around the coffee mug. "What kind of pattern?" "The school records you requested arrived this afternoon." I frowned. "I haven't even looked at them yet." "I have," she continued in the same calm, professional tone. Over the last 18 months, Sophie's teacher documented several concerning changes. Her grades slipped. She became unusually quiet in class. She stopped participating in group activities, and the school counselor recommended family counseling twice. I closed my eyes. And the recommendations were acknowledged by both parents. Another pause. But there is no indication they ever followed through. For several seconds, all I could hear was the sound of the ocean. I should have noticed, I said quietly. No. Melissa stopped me immediately. You weren't living in that house every day. Don't carry responsibility that belongs somewhere else. I nodded even though she couldn't see me. What happens now? We move carefully. She explained that rushing into court fueled by anger rarely helped anyone. Instead, we would build a complete picture: medical records, school reports, witness statements, photographs, phone logs, everything that showed not only what had happened that weekend but how Sophie had been affected over time. Judges don't just look at one mistake, Melissa said. They look at the child's overall well-being. That made sense. Before ending the call, she added one more thing. Keep doing exactly what you're doing. What do you mean? Give her stability. The following morning, Sophie woke me before sunrise. Grandpa. I opened one eye. What time is it? I don't know. Then why are we awake? She grinned. Because dolphins don't sleep in. I laughed so hard I nearly fell out of bed. Within 30 minutes, we were walking along the beach with a local guide who promised there was a good chance we'd spot dolphins just offshore. He wasn't wrong. Less than 20 minutes into the boat ride, a small pod surfaced beside us. Sophie's mouth fell open. They're real. I told you. One dolphin leaped completely out of the water. She clapped so hard the captain started laughing. For the next hour she asked at least 50 questions. Do they have names? Do they smile? Do they sleep underwater? Even the captain admitted she'd asked things he'd never thought about before. As we headed back toward the dock, Sophie leaned against my shoulder. This is the best day I've ever had. I smiled. I'm glad. No. She shook her head. I mean it. Her voice became almost a whisper. I didn't know grown-ups could spend the whole day with you just because they wanted to. That sentence stayed with me long after she'd forgotten saying it. Later that afternoon, while Sophie colored pictures at the cottage, my phone buzzed again. Daniel. This time he left a voicemail. Dad, please call me. We just got back. Sophie's room is empty. Margaret won't answer the door, and nobody will tell us where she is. Please, just tell me she's safe. I listened to the message twice. He sounded frightened. Good. Not because I wanted him to suffer. Because for the first time since this nightmare began, he finally understood what fear felt like. I didn't return the call immediately. Instead, I walked back into the living room. Sophie looked up from her coloring book. Want to see what I drew? She held up a picture. It was the beach. The little cottage. 2 stick figures holding hands beneath a bright yellow sun. One was labeled Grandpa. The other simply read me. There were no tears in the picture. No dark clouds. No empty house. Just peace. I stared at it for a long moment. I love it. She smiled proudly. I'm going to hang it on your refrigerator. I think that's exactly where it belongs. That evening, as the sun disappeared below the horizon, I finally returned Daniel's call. He answered before the first ring finished. Dad, where's Sophie? She's safe. A long breath escaped on the other end. Thank God. No, I said quietly. Thank the people who cared enough to notice she'd been left alone. Silence. I can explain. I hope you can. I made a terrible mistake. I looked out toward the ocean, watching the last bit of daylight fade into the water. We'll talk when I get home. Then I ended the call. Not because I was angry anymore. Because there was nothing left to say over the phone. The real conversation, the one that would determine what happened to our family, would have to happen face to face. And when it did, I wasn't walking into it alone. Melissa Grant would be sitting right beside me, and every fact we'd gathered over the past week would be waiting on the table. For the first time since that late-night phone call from Margaret, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel. Not revenge. Not satisfaction. Confidence. Because whatever happened next, Sophie finally had someone fighting for her. The flight home to Savannah, Georgia was quiet. Lily fell asleep before we even reached cruising altitude. Her head rested against my shoulder, her stuffed bunny tucked under one arm, and an unopened bag of pretzels sat in her lap. A flight attendant leaned over and smiled. "She's worn out. Best kind of tired there is," I whispered. She nodded and quietly walked away. I stared out the window for most of the flight. Not because I was nervous. Because I already knew exactly what had to happen next. During our vacation I had done all my worrying. Now it was time to act. 2 days earlier, Derek and Melissa had returned from their cruise. I knew because my phone had finally buzzed. Not a call. Not an apology. Just a text. "We need to talk when you're back." That was it. 6 words. No explanation. No acknowledgement of what they'd done. I forwarded the message to attorney Rebecca Collins. "Monday. 9 o'clock. My house." She replied 4 minutes later. "Already cleared my schedule. I'll bring the paperwork." Monday morning arrived cold and gray. At exactly 8:58 a.m., Rebecca pulled into my driveway. She wasn't flashy. Simple navy suit. Leather briefcase. Hair pulled back. She looked like someone who had spent years walking into difficult conversations without ever raising her voice. I appreciated that. She accepted a cup of coffee, spread several folders across my dining room table, and looked at me. "They don't know I'm here? They think we're just having a family discussion." A tiny smile crossed her face. "We are." She checked her watch. Just one with legal documentation. At 9:04, Derek's truck rolled into the driveway. I heard both doors close. A moment later they walked inside. My son looked different. Vacation tan. Expensive sunglasses hanging from his shirt. But underneath all that, he looked exhausted. Melissa walked beside him with her shoulders squared like she'd rehearsed this meeting all weekend. "Dad." Then Derek noticed Rebecca. He stopped walking. "Who's this?" I stood. "Derek, Melissa, this is Rebecca Collins. My attorney." Silence. Melissa looked from Rebecca to the folders on the table. Her confidence slipped just a little. "We thought this was supposed to be private." Rebecca smiled politely. "It is. Please have a seat." For reasons even Melissa couldn't explain, she obeyed. Rebecca opened the first folder. No dramatic speech. No lecture. She simply slid one sheet of paper toward them. It was a timeline. Every date. Every phone call. Every text. Every witness. Every social media post. Every statement Lily had made. Every minute she had been left alone. Derek read quietly. Melissa barely made it halfway before shaking her head. "This isn't fair. We arranged for someone to check on her." Rebecca looked directly at her. "Can you provide documentation?" Melissa stayed silent. "No." Rebecca continued. "Then legally speaking, there was no supervision." She calmly explained state law. How leaving a child that young alone for multiple days qualified as neglect. How witness statements had already been signed. How timestamps supported every claim. How Lily's own recorded interview matched the evidence. Neither of them interrupted again. Rebecca opened another folder. "There are 3 actions ready to file." She spoke the words the same way someone reads a grocery list. No emotion. Just facts. A petition for legally protected grandparent visitation. A formal report to Child Protective Services. And a request for a complete family evaluation regarding Lily's emotional well-being. Melissa's face lost its color. Derek stared at the table. Rebecca folded her hands. "The reports are complete. They have not yet been submitted. That decision depends entirely on what happens next." The room became unbelievably quiet. Finally, Derek looked at me. His eyes were red. "Dad." I waited. He swallowed hard. I knew it was wrong. I knew before we left. He rubbed both hands across his face. I packed my suitcase. I walked past Lily's bedroom. She looked at me. And I still left. His voice cracked. I told myself we'd make it up to her later. I wanted to believe that. It was easier. Melissa looked shocked. She clearly hadn't expected him to admit any of it. But he kept talking. "I failed her. And I failed you." I didn't interrupt. Sometimes silence forces people to finish telling the truth. When he finally stopped talking, I opened one last folder. "I believe you know you failed. But that's not the part that hurt me most." He looked up. "The part that hurt was knowing you understood exactly what you were doing." He closed his eyes. I slid the documents toward them. My updated estate plan. Melissa picked it up first. Her eyes widened. Every major asset I owned. The house. My retirement savings. Family property outside Savannah. Everything significant had been transferred into an irrevocable trust. For Lily. Only Lily. She would receive everything when she became an adult. Independent trustees would manage it. Neither Derek nor Melissa would ever control a single dollar. Not now. Not later. Not ever. Melissa stared at me. "You actually changed everything?" "I did. You chose her over us." I nodded once. "You made your choice. So I made mine." No anger. No shouting. Just truth. Rebecca placed one final document on the table. Our proposal. 4 conditions. Simple. Non-negotiable. Lily would begin weekly therapy immediately. I would receive legally protected visitation every other weekend and several weeks every summer. Both parents would attend family counseling and parenting classes. And the CPS report would remain unfiled for 1 year. Provided every condition was followed exactly. Miss one requirement. And the report would be submitted immediately. No warnings. No negotiations. Rebecca closed her briefcase. Those are the terms. Nothing else needed to be said. Melissa looked at Derek. He slowly nodded. She hesitated. Then nodded too. They signed every page. As they prepared to leave, Derek stopped at the front door. He didn't turn around. "How's Lily?" I answered honestly. "She's smiling again." A long pause. "I'm glad. I hope one day you earn the right to hear her laugh the way I did last week." He lowered his head. Then quietly walked outside. Melissa followed without saying another word. The front door closed. About 7 months have passed since that morning. Lily calls me every Sunday evening without fail. Sometimes we talk 10 minutes. Sometimes an hour. She tells me about school. About her therapist, Ms. Grace, who always smells like cinnamon cookies. About the pancakes she now insists on making herself every Saturday. About learning to ride a bicycle without training wheels. She laughs often now. Real laughter. The kind that fills a room. Derek hasn't missed a single parent-teacher conference. He volunteers at school events. He keeps every counseling appointment. He isn't asking for praise. He's simply doing the work. That's the only kind of change I believe in. Melissa still struggles. Healing isn't the same for everyone. Some weeks she's warm. Some weeks she's distant. But she keeps showing up. And sometimes, showing up is the first step toward becoming the parent your child deserved all along. As for me, I don't think revenge was ever the point. People keep asking if I won. No. Lily won. She learned that one person refusing to give up on her could change the direction of an entire life. If I accomplished anything, that's enough for me. and I'd make the exact same choice all over again.